It's been nearly a year since I posted on this channel. This topic on Abraham has taken hundreds of hours to make because I had to start from the ground floor. This channel mostly has been dedicated to interviewing spiritualists, astrology, and other matters of that sort. But living in the Bible Belt, when I'm trying to connect with people, I often see that I have to go into the realm of Christianity in order for them to understand what I'm saying. And after doing this research, I think it's fair to say so. Whenever you get into any sort of spiritual study, it takes so much effort to actually understand what's going on because usually there is mountains of stuff you need to read. I think it's important for spiritualists, like probably you and I, to understand all aspects of spirituality, even the Bible. I ended up making this video about Abraham rather than starting at the beginning with the creation story because every single religion and culture is going to have its own nuanced creation story. The patriarchs of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob are fundamental aspects of what the Hebrew people and Israelite people stood for and became. This not only is the foundation for Judaism, this is the foundation for Christianity and Islam. Like I said, in order for me to fully understand what I'm about to tell you, it took me hundreds of hours of reading the Tanakh. Not only the Tanakh, but other books like Ancient Israel and other books that I'll probably end up making videos on at a later date, like the extra-biblical sources of Abraham and the laws and rules of the Middle East at that time. So I want to clarify that I'm not going to be reading word for word out of the Tanakh. There's so much these and thous and ancient language that in order to read Shakespeare at a high level, you need to take a Shakespearean English course. Even if you're really good at English, you could read Shakespeare, but you need to understand more of the rules of their grammars in that they often talked more metaphorically or through some sort of alternative meaning. The Tanakh is exactly like that. It's kind of a Shakespearean Hebrew. So I'm reading a direct Hebrew to English translation. Obviously, I don't understand Hebrew. So instead, this is going to be a retelling that Gen Z listeners like I can understand. Okay, I'm going to tell you the story of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in their entirety. It's going to take a little while, but we start our story at Genesis 11. God scattered the people building the Tower of Babel. Generations of people or places are listed before we end at Serug, who begots Nahor, who begots Terah, who begots Abram. Abram is actually Abraham, but there are name changes that we're going to get into later. For now, we're just going to stick to Abram. Abram marries Sarai. Then Abram, Sarai, and his cousins set away from Ur. Essentially, all that's happening here is setting up that Abram left Mesopotamia. Chapter 12 tells us why. Genesis 12. The all-caps Lord tells Abram that if he gets out of his father's house, he will be rewarded with a great nation. Abram then travels outside of Bethel and made an altar for the Lord. So Bethel's a small town in the Canaan at that time. Abram keeps going south but encounters famine in the lands, so he has to go to Egypt. Around this time, Abram is 75 years old, but I suppose his wife is not, because Abram tells Sarai, "Look, you are a hot babe. If you say you're my wife, they're going to kill me and take you, so I got to be your brother." Abram was right. The princes of Egypt saw her and brought Sarai to the Pharaoh. Since Abram is her brother, they gave him a bunch of livestock and he chilled. It's kind of like a bridal price. The Pharaoh did not get to chill, however, since the Lord plagued him in his house because Sarai was Abram's hot wife. So Pharaoh was like, "What the hell? Why did you tell me she was your sister?" Then Abram leaves with Sarai and all of his new money and livestock from that bridal price. The Pharaoh didn't take it back. This is actually going to be a repeating story throughout all of this. Genesis 13. Abram went back to his place outside of Bethel with his newfound wealth and met up with his nephew Lot. They started beefing over the fact that there wasn't enough land for the two of them. So the Lord said, "You two and your cattle, pick sides, stay there." Lot picked the eastern plains of Jordan, and Abram stayed in the Canaan. Abram continues by setting up another altar in Hebron. Genesis 14. Lot gets taken away by a king from the land of Elam, kind of in the southeastern corner of the Canaanite lands, probably around where Saudi Arabia is now. So Abram has to set off to save him. Abram, armed with his servants, of which there are 318, easily drove the king of Elam out. So I guess he didn't have a lot of dudes. Once Abram had his nephew Lot back, he took all the women and goods and brought them back, presumably to Hebron. This impressed all the surrounding kings, most notably the king of Salem, which is the only mention of Jerusalem in Genesis, but it actually might not be Jerusalem. It's kind of debated among biblical scholars. There is the priest king of Salem is called Melchizedek. It's hard to pronounce. There's an entire video by Religion for Breakfast that covers this. It's a fascinating concept because there's actually some ties with the prophecies of Melchizedek found with the Dead Sea Scrolls and Jesus later on. So he could have been a literary influence for the writing of Jesus. Anyway, we can't cover that right now. We're just going to keep moving on. Melchizedek praises Abram, specifically before he praises God. And this is probably written in from a later date, kind of saying Jerusalem praises Abram, picking a side. Genesis 15, the Lord tells Abram that he is doing great and will be rewarded. Abram gets a bit salty and tells the Lord, I don't have a son. How am I supposed to have a great nation? Lord responds by telling Abram that his seed will be in a foreign land and will be under control for 400 years. Afterwards, then they will be rewarded. Cool. Lord ends up by saying Abram's children will inherit the land between the Nile and the Euphrates, so essentially Egypt to Mesopotamia. Genesis 16, Abram's wife Sarai can't have children. So after a decade in the Canaan, she tells Abram that he can have a child with their Egyptian maid Hagar. Abram does, and Sarai gets pissed. Sarai treats Hagar so poorly that Hagar leaves to Shur, which is right outside Egypt. On her way, the Lord hears Hagar's pain. Lord tells Hagar, I hear your sadness, but you need to go back to your mistress. Your son is going to be Ishmael, and he's going to be the Ishmaelite people, and they will fight a lot. Abram was about 86 years old when Ishmael was born. Genesis 17. Lord asks Abram to accept him, and then changes Abram's name to Abraham. So now he has his nice little Pokemon evolution name here. Lord then lays down some truths about what accepting him means, and that's circumcision. Every male must be circumcised, or their soul will be cast away from the Lord. This is actually the first mention in the Tanakh of any sort of hell, or like soul being cast away from God. It has to do with circumcision. How crazy. Lord changes Sarai's name to Sarah, so she gets a Pokemon name, and tells her that she can have a child. So she changed her name. She can have a child now. Cool. The child's name will be Isaac. Isaac will have sons that will become the 12 princes of their great nation. Abram is almost 100 at this point. Sarah is 90, and Abraham ends the chapter by circumcising himself, his 13-year-old son Ishmael, and every male in the house, which he was rolling with 318 dudes. Now, if we run the calculations, if we have like a 8-hour day, that's like a dude getting circumcised every 40 seconds. No way all those are clean cuts. Genesis 18, outside Hebron, Abraham was relaxing in his tent during the heat of the day, and 3 men appeared outside. These men were the Lord, or angels, or something. Abraham got excited and wanted to wash their feet and for Sarah to get food for them. One of the men said Sarah was going to have a child. Remember, Sarah's 90 at this point. She laughed, and she said, shall I have pleasure as well? My man is old too. Lord got offended and said, is anything too hard for the Lord? Sarah got scared and lied. She said, I didn't laugh. And Lord went, nah, you did. The 3 men got up, and they started to head towards Sodom. Abraham follows, and Lord decides to tell Abraham what crazy thing he's about to do. Because he's like, Abraham's going to birth a great nation. I'm going to be honest. This is going to be a crazy night. Lord says he heard some grievous cries from Sodom and Gomorrah, and he wants to go over there and sees if he needs to clean up. Abraham protests the Lord and says, wait, if there are 50 good people, will you be the judge of all earth and do the right thing and spare them? And Lord went, okay, maybe there's 50. Yeah. Abraham protested and said, what if there are 45? Lord went, yeah. Abraham protested and said, what if there are 40? Lord went, yeah. Abraham protested and said, what if there are 30? Lord went, yeah. Abraham protested and said, what if there are 20? Lord went, yeah. Abraham protested and said, what if there are 10? Lord went, yeah, and then he left. So, a really long passage about Abraham haggling with God. Abraham went back home to Hebron. Genesis 19. 2 angels appeared before Lot and Sodom. So Lot is Abraham's nephew that he traveled out of Ur with. And there's only 2 angels now, so we lost one of them. The angels tell Lot they will be in the streets at night, observing the people. Lot makes them a meal in his house, but all the men start assembling outside. They ask Lot to bring out the men so they may know them. Now, when the term know them or to know is used in the Tanakh, in ancient Hebrew, that's sensual. Sensual. Lot says he has 2 daughters that are still virgins, and he offers them up instead. This angers the men who want angel man action. So they break into Lot's house. The angels blind the men and warn Lot to get out of town. Lot asked Lord to spare the small town of Zoar, and the Lord does, because I guess he's smoking a few villages, and he was thinking about there too. While escaping to Zoar, Lord says, don't look back. But being a woman and always disobeying God, Lot's wife looks back and turns into a pillar of salt. God remembers Abraham, because God, I guess, to hear you or remember you. This happens a lot. And Lot fears staying in Zoar, so he takes his 2 daughters to a nearby mountain. God goes off to Abraham again. Lot's like, God's not here anymore. It's important to know this is like kind of set in the Bronze Age, but written in the Iron Age. So there's a bit of a disconnection of God being this physical nationalistic being that's actually present in a place like Jerusalem or Hebron that has altars built there, and a more personal God, which Judaism, Christianity, and Islam would become, where it's this all-encompassing God that doesn't need a physical place. So here we still see remnants of that where the Lord remembers or hears the cries. Sorry, going on. Lord goes back to Abraham. Lot fears staying in Zoar, so he takes his 2 daughters to the nearby mountain. The oldest daughter tells the youngest daughter, look, ain't no man coming up this mountain. We have to get Dad blisteringly drunk and have kids with him to preserve the family. So the 2 do so. And both nights, Lot is said to be so drunk that he is unaware when his daughters entered and left the tent. So one night for one daughter, second night for the second daughter. The sons born from this are Moab, father of the Moabites, and Ben-Ami, father of the Ammonites. The Moabites and the Ammonites were competing rivals with Israel, so this totally wasn't added later to make the neighbors look bad. Genesis 20. This is literally a retelling of Genesis 12, where Abraham lied to the Pharaoh, well, Abram at that point, and Sarah being his sister. Lord punishes the Pharaoh, and Pharaoh's like, what the hell? You said this is his sister, now I'm being cursed by God? Yeah, you remember all that. But it's the exact same story, but again with the king of Gerar and Abimelech. It's the exact same story, except the first Sarah was like 60 because she was 10 years younger than Abraham. So here she's over 100. But again, Abraham's like, we got to say, you're my sister. They do. The king takes her, gets cursed by God, and then it's like, what the hell? So, but he got that bridal price for his wife being sold to another man. So Abraham's running a straight scam. Dude haggles with God and runs like hot wife scams. It's twice now. He's married off his wife and taken the bridal price. And Lord had to scare whatever king. And then Abraham walked away loaded. Before the commandments, you really could do anything as long as Lord says you could. Also, there's a strange detail in this one where Lord heals the people of Gerar by taking Sarah away because she was closing up all the wombs of the women that were there. Genesis 21. Finally, Sarah gets her baby Isaac. After all the drama about being infertile and the not being infertile, she has a child and weans him at 100. Hagar, the Egyptian maid who had Abraham's other baby, Ishmael, is kicked out. Sarah is like, Ishmael will not be around baby Isaac growing up. Abraham was a bit stressed about this because that's also technically his son, but the Lord tells Abraham it's cool to abandon his son and the mistress because they're going to go on to have another nation. So Abraham gives Hagar some bread and water before booting her into the wilderness. Hagar is very sad by this. She leaves Ishmael under a bush because she doesn't want to see her kid die. Lord hears Hagar weeping and crying and is like, why are you sad? Here is a well. He gave her a well. Hagar raises her kid in the wilderness near this well, and Ishmael becomes an incredible archer because he has to hunt for all of his meals. Meanwhile, Abraham makes peace treaty with Abimelech and made his own well in Beersheba. Remind you, he's loaded. I think technically it gave, at this point, 1,000 shekels of silver, which was crazy rich at the time, but he can't keep his kid. But he went on, traveled, went to Beersheba, which is in the southern Canaan, right before you really get into the Sinai. And then he declared God or Lord over that place as well. And then Abraham starts wandering into the Philistines. Listen, Before we start Genesis 22, I know it may be a bit confusing with all these storylines kind of being flung around and so many names, but just know that a lot of these stories have been redacted and written over, like literally over when they're transcribing books down when they were writing. Sometimes they would add notes in that would get mistaken for actual verses. And so there would be a bunch of misplaced verses, stuff that seems really important and gets interpreted as really important, but later we find out isn't at all important to the history of what we're going over. Just know from here on out, it gets a bit more straightforward, and there's not so much history and names. It's more of the actual narrative. Genesis 22. Lord tells Abraham to take his son Isaac to a specific place to sacrifice his son. It takes them 3 days to get there. And when they're walking up the mountain, Isaac asks Abraham, why don't we have a ram to sacrifice? There were a lot of animal sacrifices at this point, a ram being the most common. Abraham lies and says that Lord will provide a ram for their sacrifice when we get there. Abraham arrives, sets up the wood, binds Isaac. This is known as the binding of Isaac. Pretty cool game. And before he starts to stab his son, an angel appears and told him he doesn't have to do that anymore. It was a test to see if he feared God. And they're like, we know you fear the Lord, so you're all good. Abraham looks behind him, and a ram is stuck by its horn in a small tree. So that ram gets sacrificed instead of Isaac. Genesis 23. At the age of 127, Sarah dies in Hebron. Abraham sets up to bury her and is offered a cave for free by Ephron the Hittite. Abraham rejects and gives 400 shekels for the cave. He says, no, I'm going to buy this cave. I don't want to just have it given. This was the first land purchased in the Canaan by Abraham, and also signifying that the Hebrews did purchase land in the Canaan, therefore are rightful owners of it, because later on we'll get into they do a lot of killing native people. They do a lot of that's all the Judges books and stuff. Genesis 24. This is the longest chapter in Genesis, but I'm going to save you a ton of time. Essentially, Abraham is pretty old, probably over 130 years old, and wants to make sure his son Isaac will be secure. Specifically, that he has a wife. Abraham sends a servant to Mesopotamia to find a wife from their homeland that Isaac can marry. He doesn't want Isaac marrying a Canaanite woman. The servant goes to Nahor and finds Rebekah. After a ton of detail, Rebekah journeys back to Isaac and the Canaan. So now Isaac has his wife, Rebekah. Genesis 25. Abraham is like over 130 at this point, and his wife Sarah is dead. She's in the cave. So Abraham gets another wife, Keturah, and starts having more babies. Yeah, 6 more babies, and he's still fertile from years 130 to 135-ish, if I'd guess. Take note that in Genesis 25:6, Abraham mentions also having children with concubines. Many of these children were the names of tribes or places, like his son Medan, Midian, and Shua. So these may be metaphorical takeovers meant to symbolize that the Israelites, or not Israelites, Hebrew people were spreading at this point. Sorry. It's the Hebrew people become the Israelites. Abraham ends up passing away at 175 years old and is buried in the cave he bought for Sarah in Genesis 23. So Abraham is buried in the Canaan. That's the end of our first patriarch. We still have a little bit more in Genesis 25 as we move on with Isaac's story, though. After the death of Abraham, Isaac hits the same conception plot point. His wife Rebekah cannot conceive, so the Lord blesses her, and she has a rough birth of twins. Lord warns Rebekah that inside her are 2 great nations, and the eldest will serve the younger. The eldest was Esau, and he grew up to be hairy and an excellent hunter. The younger was Jacob, who held on to Esau's heel as he left the womb. Jacob grew up to be plain, and he lived in the tents, so a bit more of an inactive man. One day, Esau was hunting but arrived to the tents ill. He begged Jacob to feed him the red pottage that Jacob had been making. Jacob agreed, but only on the condition that Esau sells his birthright to Jacob, because Esau technically was the first one out of the womb. Being the older brother, he was supposed to get the inheritance to early Hebrew tradition. So Esau agrees, he eats the red pottage, and forever is known as Edom. Thus it is stated in Genesis 25, Esau despised his birthright. So now Isaac will have to give his inheritance to Jacob. Genesis 26, a famine strikes the Canaan again. Like his father, Isaac is thinking about going to Egypt for refuge, but Lord warns him to stay in Gerar in Philistia. Here we meet Abimelech again. Remember him from Genesis 20, where Abraham managed to successfully get the second hot wife scam off in Gerar? Well, Isaac's here. Isaac does the exact same thing. Abimelech takes Rebekah, but in this third instance, because he's been tricked before, he catches Isaac sporting with Rebekah, so kissing her, I don't know, whatever. Abimelech confronts Isaac, but Isaac ends up prosperous in the lands anyway. He just knows how to grow cattle well in Philistia. The Philistines grew envious of a rich Isaac and his hot wife. So Abimelech states he's too powerful and kicks him out of Philistia. Isaac is reassured of the Lord of the same covenant that was shown to Abraham. So Isaac builds an altar and a well that founds the holy site of Beersheba. It says that Abraham already blessed this place earlier with the Lord, but Isaac creates an altar and a well physically. Genesis 26 ends by mentioning that Esau/Edom married 2 Hittite women, which made Isaac and Rebekah very upset. They did not like that he married a woman near the Canaanite lands. He wanted fresh Mesopotamian women. I thought I could do all that in one day. I could not do all that in one day. I'm still getting my stamina bar leveled up here. We don't have that much further to go. Let's just get through. I said I was going to do this, so I'm going to do this. Genesis 27. Isaac is going blind in his elder years and asks his oldest son Esau to get him some venison, and he will be blessed before Isaac passes. The mother Rebekah schemes with Jacob to steal that blessing, and Rebekah asks Jacob to go get some goats. Rebekah puts goat fur on Jacob's hands and neck to simulate being a hairy man like Esau. Jacob goes to his father's bed and presents the meat. At first, Isaac is skeptical, but the hairy hands fool him. He gives the blessing to Jacob, and Jacob inherits all the goods from Isaac. Esau appears after Jacob dips, and Isaac tells Esau that he's already given his blessing. Esau's like, "You only got one?" So Jacob gives him another blessing, but with the difference that Esau will live by the sword and one day serve Jacob for a while. Esau naturally wants to unalive Jacob at this point. So Rebekah tells Jacob to leave, get out of town. Genesis 28. Isaac tells Jacob, never marry a Canaan woman. You need to go back to Mesopotamia to get a good wife. While Jacob is heading north, he has a dream at Bethel of a staircase to the heavens, and Lord presents himself to Jacob in a dream, not literally. Jacob wakes up, makes an altar, and in the last verse, he says he'll give a tenth of everything he has to the Lord. So this is why they do the trays at church and why every pastor has a boat. Genesis 29. Jacob is still running away from Esau / fulfilling his father's wishes to get a Mesopotamian wife. Jacob meets Rachel and kisses her, knowing this is my bae. This is my Mesopotamian bae. Jacob goes to her father Laban and works for 7 years under him to get his blessing. After 7 years, Jacob gets to marry Rachel, but yet again, we have another instance of wife swap drama. That's right. The father places Rachel's older sister Leah in the marriage bed, and Jacob gets in there. In the morning, Jacob, like the Pharaoh in Genesis 12 and Abimelech in Genesis 20 and 26, gets pissed about the deception. He confronts Laban. Laban states, here in Mesopotamia, you got to give away your eldest daughter first. That's just how we do it over here. So Jacob double dips and serves another 7 years to get Rachel, so he's going to marry both of them. Jacob does have 7 children with Leah, the older sister, and there's this whole drama about childbearing. It's similar to Hagar and Sarah in Genesis 16, where Rachel is unable to have children. There's a ton of 7 used here, mostly for symbolic meaning, but it is pretty wild that he had 7 kids with Leah on the pursuit of Rachel. Genesis 30. Rachel and Jacob are beefing because she can't have kids. And Jacob's like, what do you want me to do about that? She tries to use mandrake as an aphrodisiac, but eventually she just gets her maid to have kids with Jacob, much like Abraham having kids with Hagar. Leah, who is also still married to Jacob, is unable to have any more kids after 7 of them. So she also has to get a maid to have kids with Jacob. So even if you have 7 kids, it doesn't get you off the hook. You need to continually have kids. Eventually, Lord remembers Rachel, and she has 2 sons, Joseph and Benjamin. Jacob progresses the story away from all the fertility issues and begins selectively breeding his sheep and goats. This enables him to have a specific coat on all of his livestock, so he knows where they've been stolen from. It helps with his selling them. It's a very dense and confusing passage about livestock logistics back in what would be the Iron Age. This allows Jacob to get wealthy, but creates tension with Rachel's father. And then Jacob has to leave Mesopotamia because he got too rich.
So a bit of whiplash in Genesis 30, because at first it is super heavy and all the kid talk, and then it just suddenly switches straight into all this livestock talk. Anyway, what we really need to get away from this is that Jacob's having a bunch of kids, and he's also getting rich, so much so that he got kicked out of Mesopotamia by his stepdad, I guess now. Genesis 31, the Lord tells Jacob to get out of Laban's company. I've noticed this a lot. They'll have a chapter end with, Isaac or Jacob leaving, only for the next chapter to begin with the Lord telling them that they need to leave. Laban's sons are getting jealous, but after Jacob leaves, Laban notices his idols are gone. In the Tanakh, they're called images, so more than likely these idols were drawings or sculptures of Baal or some other Mesopotamian deity. Well, thing is, Jacob didn't steal them, for sure, because he's the good guy in our story. Obviously, it was his sinful wife, Rachel, who hid them underneath her seat. She was in her tent. She put them underneath the seat she was sitting in. Laban comes breaking in and is like, I need to check everything. Get up. And she goes, sorry, dude, I can't get up because I'm on my period. Laban's like, gross, whatever. Okay, I'll just make a truce with Jacob. They go to a mound and create a little altar together. The mound is then known as Gilead. Interesting note here is that while Jacob is mentioning his God as the God of not only Abraham, but also Nahor and his father, usually it's Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob are the ones that are mentioned specifically as the God of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. Perhaps Jacob uses Nahor and Abraham's father here because Laban is from Mesopotamia. So there was a bit of a more lore established, like my God goes way back. Just a thought. Genesis 32. Finally, Jacob gets a Pokemon evolution name here, and his name is changed to Israel. Here's how it happens. Jacob starts beefing with his older brother, his hairy older brother, Esau again, and Esau charges at Jacob with 400 dudes. So Jacob gives most of his riches to Esau as a peace treaty, then tries to escape with his wives. Jacob was going to give Esau everything except an actual confrontation because he was scared. At this point in the story, Jacob should have known that he should have believed in the Lord and he would get saved, but instead Jacob runs. Jacob stays behind while his wives travel ahead, and he's near a river. There, a mysterious man wrestles him, like a wrestling match, like OSU wrestling match. This mysterious man stays on Jacob till dawn, but eventually warns that this is going to end soon and places his hand on the hip of Jacob, then magically dislocates it. Jacob, desperate and clinging on, asks this man, "Who are you?" But this offends the mystery man. Jacob demands a blessing stone before their departure, and the man gives Jacob his Pokemon evolution name of Israel. There's a lot of ancient subtext here, but essentially he's getting, this was supposed to be God or an angel in the river, and he's wrestling with him because Jacob ran away from Esau instead of confronting him, so he wrestled with him all night long. Israel actually literally translates to a person who wrestles with God, or something very, very close to that. And even though he got the new name Israel here, he still actually references Jacob more often than not. Only a few times does he actually reference Israel, so I'm probably just going to keep calling him Jacob throughout most of the story, unless it seems important. It seems Jacob is his physical name and Israel being his ascended patriarchal name, I guess. The mysterious man leaves Jacob with a limp, and Jacob goes on to name the place he was wrestled as Peniel, which I believe translates to face of God. So maybe this was his apology to God for asking the mysterious man's identity. I don't know. This chapter is more symbolic of Jacob's measurement of loyalty to God, because Jacob wouldn't engage Esau and trust in the Lord's protection. He gave up all his riches and was physically encountered by an angry angel or God at the river. The chapter ends with Jacob mentioning that it is not kosher to eat the sciatic nerve around the thigh because that is where he got injured by God. Really cool chapter. It's just a lot of metaphorical stuff. But now we know where Israel comes from. It's, God or an angel wrestled with him. It's probably God. But again, this is another instance where God has to be physical or actually physically comes down. If the mysterious man is God, this is 1,000 years before Jesus, and you have God physically coming down to earth. Genesis 33. Jacob notices Esau approaching with the 400 dudes we were talking about to fuck up his family. So Jacob hides his kids, hides his wife, and all the maids he has. Jacob confronts Esau and bows in front of him 7 times, but Esau's actually cool with him now. I don't know why he brought 400 guys with him, but the beef is settled. Esau offers to travel with Jacob, but Jacob's like, nah, we're going to go back to the Canaan. There he establishes altars at Succoth and Shechem. Shechem is going to go on to be the Israelite capital, the actual kingdom of Israel's capital for a while. And the altar there is named El Elohi Israel. El is a word for God from the areas around Mesopotamia. It's important because El is how they would have referred to God in Genesis before the story of Moses and God changing his name to Yahweh. But there's more on that later. Genesis 34. This is a fun one. The whole town gets circumcised. Big deal in Genesis. So one of Jacob's daughter, Dinah, goes out to see the land and is R-worded, sensually assaulted, if you know what I mean. Essayed, you get the idea. The guy who does this to her is named Shechem. That, like the city. I know that I just said that was a city, but in this chapter, Shechem is a Hivite prince. Shechem falls in love with Dinah and wants to marry her. So he asks Jacob. Jacob's not upset that Dinah got assaulted. He's upset that it was an uncircumcised male proposing to her. So the entire city of Hivite men are circumcised. And on the third day, when the men are still in pain from the chopping, Simeon and Levi, Dinah's brothers, which are sons of Isaac, attack and unalive every male in Shechem, the city. Simon and Levi loot all the riches, cattle, women, and kids. This disturbs Jacob, who thinks that this is not a good look for the neighbors. We're out here trying to preach a new God, and we just took women and kids because they were uncircumcised. Genesis 35. This chapter is strange since it retells the story of how Jacob got his Israel name. God, not Lord this time, it's changed the word to God, tells Jacob to go to Bethel and make an altar, El Bethel, a lot of El, Israel. God informs Jacob that his name is Israel again and tells Jacob to put away the strange gods that are among you, which is interesting because he's referring to what I would consider other actual gods. So this would be maybe the Hebrew Bible being a bit polytheistic, but more than likely it is talking about the idols, which would have been just trinkets that they worshipped. Jacob gets all the idols / gods and earrings and whatever, buries them under a tree in Shechem. His wife Rachel then dies while giving birth to the final prince of Israel, Benjamin. And then at the end of this chapter, Isaac, our second patriarch, dies at 180. He didn't get a lot of coverage in this. Poor Isaac really gets left out. I mean, at least he got a cool game, but really gets left out of the Hebrew Bible in general. Genesis 36. Here we skip. The entire chapter is about Esau and his descendants. Esau is Edom. Edom is a kingdom in the east of Kadesh Barnea. Kadesh Barnea is a city that's like in the very south part before you get into the Sinai. Genesis 37. This is the beginning of the story of Joseph. The multicolored coat has an awesome animation movie. Really good. Anyways, Jacob is chilling in the Canaan, and he has his 12 sons. One of the more interesting name swaps for Jacob and Israel here happens as Jacob is chilling in the Canaan, but then immediately after that, the Tanakh specifies that Israel loves Joseph. Even more specifically, that Israel loves Joseph because he was the child of his old age. Israel makes him a cool coat, being like, I like you the most. You get all these cool colors. The brothers hated him for that. It actually does say in Genesis 37:4, they hated him and could not speak peaceably unto him. So really salty bros. To make this better, Joseph reveals he has not one but two dreams of his brothers bowing down to him. So they sell him to some Ishmaelite / Midianite traders. They're Ishmaelites, which you remember baby Ishmael got left under a bush, Hagar, all that. And the Midianites, I had to do a lot of research into this, are actually used interchangeably here. So they refer to the Ishmaelites as the Midianites, which is, I believe, a lot of people who were in Saudi Arabia at that time. So the brothers have the cool coat still after they sell their brother, and then they go back to Jacob, and they show him the coat that they dipped in blood and go, oh, man, he got attacked. It sucks. And man, Jacob's upset. He loved that boy. Let me tell you, he loved that boy. Okay, we're going to do a quick intermission. We're going to skip a few chapters here because there's no mention of Jacob, only Joseph's time in Egypt. It turns out that none of the patriarchs can be mentioned for a while Joseph is in Egypt. There's a really cool movie over it. Maybe I'll do the story at some other time. But right now we're just concentrating on the patriarchs, and Joseph ain't one of them. Essentially, just to kind of wrap up so we can recenter ourselves here before we end this out, you have Abraham, who lived in Ur in Mesopotamia. It's probably somewhere around 2000 BC. He gets told by God, if you go to the Canaan, that you will be given a great land. He goes there, he uses his wife and sells her off before like scamming and taking her back to make, thousands of silvers of shekel. With that money, he can then buy burial plot in Canaan. Therefore, Canaan has land that was bought and purchased by Abraham, so that his descendants, Isaac, when they come down and they got more Mesopotamian women to come over from their heritage so that they could keep the land in their name. They didn't want to integrate a Canaanite woman in there and then somehow have the legacy disputed if Isaac dies without an heir. So after Isaac populates with the 12 sons of Israel with a Mesopotamian women, Jacob then goes on to use his inheritance and his fortunes to expand even further until we get to this point where there's another famine in the land, just like Abraham. So we've kind of gone full circle here, just like Abraham coming over and having a lot of riches before being struck by famine and being let out. All right, let's finish this out. We are so close, and I could not explain to you how excited I am to be done recording this. I've spent months really thinking about doing this, but Genesis 42. This actually is one of my favorite opening lines of any of the chapters in Genesis. Genesis 42:1 states, "Now when Jacob saw that there was corn in Egypt, Jacob said unto his sons, Why do ye look upon one another? Get that corn." So 10 of the brothers leave to Egypt. Benjamin stays behind since Isaac doesn't want to lose all of his sons if something bad happens. And Benjamin and Joseph were his two eldest sons that he had with his proper Mesopotamian wife, not her sister. When the brothers go to Egypt, surprise, brother Joseph is now governor over the land of all of northern Egypt. That's what was happening in this chapters we skipped. So a little spoiler. Yeah, Joseph got sold to some traders, and now he's governor over presumably all of the northern delta of Egypt. I know quite a bit of Egyptology to know that him actually ruling over all of Egypt is completely impossible at this point. The brothers don't recognize a grown Joseph, and Joseph 100% doesn't want to give away his identity, but he knows those are his brothers coming to him. He plays the part and speaks to them through an interpreter, not wanting to reveal that he knows Hebrew. He accuses them of being spies and jails them for 3 days. Joseph then takes one of the brothers hostage, that being Simon, and demands that the 9 remaining brothers return to the Canaan and bring the last brother, Benjamin, to Egypt. But he wants all the brothers here. Joseph shows some mercy, though, and gives them resource and money to travel back to the Canaan. When the brothers get back, though, they realize they were given even more silver in their grain bags, which kind of scares them because they think, did one of us steal it? What's happening? When we go back to get corn, if they know we stole something, they're going to probably unalive us. So they're like, how are we going to explain all this grain and money to Dad, plus the fact that Simon's gone, plus the fact that we have to take his favorite remaining son back to Egypt? He's not going to like this. When Jacob hears the news, he refuses. Absolutely not. I will not risk Benjamin dying like Joseph did. Genesis 43. Jacob says, damn, we got another famine. We got to get more corn from Egypt. The brothers remind their father that they need Benjamin to fulfill the governor's deal. Jacob is resistant, but Judah, one of the brothers, steps up and swears, I will protect Benjamin. Nothing bad will happen to Benjamin. Just give him to me. The brothers get all the money that was left in their sacks. They go back to northern Egypt. And when they arrive, Joseph goes, total nice guy, completely nice to them. He has a feast for everyone. Joseph has one last test to his brothers, and that was giving Benjamin more food than the others, seeing like, are they going to be jealous? Have they changed their ways? Because you kind of sold me into slavery not too long ago. The brothers aren't jealous, though. And the chapter ends with all 12 brothers reuniting, all drinking, and merry. How beautiful. Surely it will stay that way. Genesis 44. On the way back, Joseph actually has one more test. He plants a silver cup in Benjamin's bag. And now they get accused of theft, what they were scared of before, Judah swears to his life, to slavery. I'm going to protect Benjamin. We can't lose Benjamin because my dad, I promised this to him. Genesis 45. Unable to refrain himself any longer, Joseph breaks down and reveals his identity. Joseph asks his brothers to pretty much start anew. Like, can we just let go of the whole getting sold into slavery stuff? I got all this now. We can kind of just chill. Go get my dad, Jacob/Israel, and come live in the Delta in Egypt until the famine's over. Genesis 46, Jacob travels to Egypt and reunites with his long-lost son Joseph. So Jacob is in Egypt now. We're reuniting, big happy family. All the brothers are here. Genesis 47, before Jacob dies, he blesses the Pharaoh. Interesting here, in 47:9, Jacob states, the days of my pilgrimage are 130 years. Few and evil have the days of the years of my life been, and have not attained unto the days of their pilgrimage. Essentially saying he's going to die younger than Abraham and Isaac because he's had a rough life. Genesis 48. This is a long and boring chapter. It's just about Jacob blessing Joseph's sons, Ephraim and Manasseh. Ephraim will go on to have a greater blessing than Manasseh. This is probably written later during the Second Temple period. I don't see what has much to do with the story otherwise. Genesis 49. In a climactic end scene, all the sons of Jacob gather around his deathbed and essentially have all of their fates prophesied. Again, this was written in after the Second Temple period because essentially they knew all the fates of the 12 tribes of Israel, which ones were going to be more prosperous and which ones weren't during the time of the King David and all of that stuff. But we aren't really talking about that now. So Genesis 50. We made it. We made it here. I don't know how, but we made it here. This is it. This is the end of Genesis and the end of the patriarchs. It just describes that Jacob gets embalmed after his death, like ancient Egyptian style, and specifically states he went through the 40-day process and then was taken to the same cave that Abraham, Isaac, and their wives are buried in Canaan. Joseph died at 110 and was put in a coffin in Egypt. So some really interesting Egyptian influence here with Jacob being embalmed and then essentially Joseph being put into an Egyptian coffin at the end. The only difference, though, is that Jacob, being a real patriarch, was buried in the Canaan. We did it. We actually did it. There's more that I want to go over here, especially with Abraham. But I wanted this video to be specifically so that it could just be a reference point that if anyone wants to know what all this was about, then come back here and just watch my dorky ass explain it to you. I might edit in some stuff later, but if I don't, it's been really fun going over this. If you want more chapters, stories, whatever, explained to you in this way, just let me know in the comments. Heck, you might have a good idea. I'll credit you and I'll be like, hey, last video, there was a comment that said you should do this. And then a year later when I made the